I think we're going to war for real.
I'll tell you one little story that I probably have never told anybody before.
We got hit with a NVA sapper company supported by infantry.
It's not easy, and that one was tough, but fortunately it worked out for us.
Welcome to War Stories, conversational military history.
All right, what's going on, everyone? Preston Stewart with Sayre Payne for War Stories, joined today by Leigh Freeman. Leigh, thank you so much for taking the time today.
You're welcome.
So, Sayre, we talked about this right before you got on. Sayre insisted that you and I had met. I think it's more appropriate to say we crossed paths at Fort Campbell.
Right.
You were talking to Bob Liebeck and Sayre, and I got pulled away on a phone call I probably didn't want to be on. But that's the loose connection here.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
Right.
You were on a phone call.
Yeah, so
Outside
you're
the
partially right,
museum.
Sayre. Outside the museum.
Week of the
that's right.
Eagles.
Mhm.
Week of the Eagles. Yeah.
Reunion. So Week of the Eagles, for anybody who doesn't know, reunion for the 101st Airborne once a year. Is that accurate?
Right. It
Okay.
is.
I've only just started going to those. Well, that was my first one.
As a
as
civilian.
as we participated in them while we were at the 101st. Is that something you get back to pretty frequently, Leigh?
I've been to about 4 of them, and I usually end up going to all the events with Bob Liebeck. And the only problem is Bob's a Ranger, and when he gets around Rangers, that's all they talk about is Ranger
Yeah.
training and Ranger experiences, and I don't have that background, so I hear a lot of Ranger stories.
A group within a group.
Right.
Yeah. And we sometimes go back and forth about like Ranger tab or CIB. And I'm in the CIB camp. Like which
Right.
one is the value? Or like if you can only have one, I think that's the merit badge of all merit badges, in my opinion.
Well, someone pointed it out to me that even if you have the Congressional Medal of Honor, the CIB goes above that.
Oh,
Interesting.
interesting. I hadn't thought of it that way. Yeah. Badges above awards, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Usually, I think that's right.
Of course, not to take away from anything else. It's just, but Bob, yeah. And Bob was, I guess, so everybody knows or is aware, Bob was on a podcast with Preston a few months ago, so he is there. But Bob was your platoon leader, right?
Right. Right. I was in the field. We had left Firebase Ripcord the first week of May, and about 2 weeks later, Bob showed up and became my platoon leader.
And let's see. I'm going to try to give that. That was episode 160 about fire sport based ripcord.
Right.
Yeah. So back up on that timeline real quick. When did you get there?
Oh,
It sounds like you were there first.
I got in Vietnam in April of 1970 at Benoit. And then when we got there, I was with about 20 guys from my advanced infantry training unit. And when they announced which unit you're going to, they said, okay, here are the guys going to the 101st. And I happened to remark to the guys around, I said, well, we're not going there because we're not airborne. And by God, all of us got called to go to the 101st. So.
And this was
ended up there.
you were at your AIT, was that at Fort Benning?
No, Fort Ord, California.
Really?
Close.
How long was what was that pipeline like? Well,
Well,
first off, were you enlisted or were you drafted? Let's start there.
Both. When I got out of high school, I asked my mom, I said, I want to go to college. And she said, well, I don't have any money and neither does your dad. So I was working some menial jobs, and at the job they were saying, well, you're kind of stuck doing this crappy work because you're going to get drafted. So I went down to my local draft board and said, hey, just take me to get this over with so I can get on with my life, because I didn't have any money to go to college, and the Army would pay the GI Bill if you've done 2 years. So that was my plan, to go into the Army for 2 years and then go to college on the GI Bill. And that's how I ended
up. And what
up
year was
Vietnam.
this when you showed up? What time frame was this when you were showing up to the recruiter?
Well, I went down to the draft board and told them to put my name on the front of the list, and that was in August. And then in November, I was flown from Omaha to Fort Ord, California, with about 50 other Nebraskans.
In 68,
69.
69. That is quick then. Very
You knew,
quick, because you said,
but there was no, I mean, you knew exactly what was going on with the war at that point. I mean, that was some of the deadliest time in Vietnam, right? 68, 69 window.
Right, right. But you have to remember that President Nixon said, as he was running for office, that he had a secret plan to end the war, and they were reducing the number of troops in Vietnam. And I thought, well, you know, I may have a 50-50 chance of going to Vietnam, but, you know, that's not bad.
Were people
So-
playing that game, trying to figure out, will I go, will I not go? And
It was 69 was the first year for the lottery for draft numbers, and my number was very low anyway. So when it came up, I was already in the Army.
and so your vibe at that time was the worst of it was probably over. Like,
Yeah,
yeah.
even when I was at Oakland Army Base, I had a stint as a KP at the steakhouse where they give all the returning veterans a steak when they return from Vietnam. And one guy came in and he announced to the crowd, he goes, "There's no war over there. You guys have no worries whatsoever." And I don't know what he did, but that's what he said when he came to the steakhouse.
I wonder
What
if he was,
about, like,
I wonder if
your-
he was being honest or not. I wonder if he's just trying to pull one over on you guys. I don't
I
know.
don't know. He was laughing when he said it, so I don't know.
What were your buddies doing? Like, what was everybody doing? I imagine they were probably in similar circumstance. If they wanted to go to college, great idea, but still don't have any money for it. And then, I don't know. You had World War II probably always in the back of your mind with all the dads and uncles that all did it. So what were they doing too? Similar stuff or different?
No, they were trying to avoid the draft and doing things so that they would have a low draft number as far as rating. So the top rating was 1A, and you know it went down to F, the rating. Well, one friend of mine immediately got married out of high school and started having children because that would make him less likely to get drafted. So, you know, in that time frame, the military was very unpopular in 69, and Nixon was reducing the forces in Vietnam, and that's pretty much it. So no one wanted to go and be the last guy to die in Vietnam. And I thought my chances were pretty good at 50-50, so, but they weren't.
Well, that's do you remember that attitude changing? Because with when you're talking about the military and the way it was regarded at that time, because obviously it wasn't always that case. Do you remember that shift?
Yeah.
Growing up?
Yeah, it was after the demonstrations against the war started in the mid-60s. When that was on television every night, they'd have a section about what was going on in Vietnam, and they'd have film and video of firefights and everything. And then they would have another section about the latest anti-war demonstration at any college in America. It was all over. And then
And you would have been like a freshman in high school or something, eighth grade when this started.
Right, I would say. And I think it turned back 180 degrees around 1980 when the all-volunteer Army came into effect.
Okay.
So you think a lot of that was tied to the draft, the force service?
Right.
Yeah.
Right, exactly. After the draft was ended, people stopped thinking about the military. The Vietnam War was over. The POWs came back from Hanoi, and in 1975, Saigon went down, and people just said, "Thank God, let's be rid of that," because it was a terrible thing for all those young men and women to die for basically nothing. And I hate to say that, but I can't think what my friends died for. I really can't. Just for their own individual bravery and courage, and that's about it. And for their fellow soldier next to them.
Yeah.
That's what they died for.
And to win battles. It's like
Right.
the soldier's there to win a battle. We can't win wars. It's just not possible to win a war as a soldier. Their only job, and even a general's job, is not to win a war. It's the entity who declares it. I mean, that's in my book. That would be Congress, you know. Granted, now it's the president because we've got rid of that part, it seems like. But the individual is doing a job.
Yeah.
You know.
But there was a lot of animosity towards Vietnam veterans when they come home. one of my favorite books was, and I forget who wrote it, is called Paco's Story. And it's about a Marine who was the only survivor on a fire base that was overrun. And he comes back to the United States and he has PTSD, and people treat him like crap, because you've heard that story about how we were treated when we returned from Vietnam. There were no parades or welcome home or anything. It was, in fact, I got to tell you this little story. When I got my wish, when I came back from the Army, I was able to go to college, and I graduated from the University of Nebraska, Omaha in 1977 with a BA in English. And one of the guidance counselors there, when I was looking for a job, said, make sure you don't tell anyone you served in Vietnam, because there's a lot of prejudice still out there. And this was 1977, and it may prevent you from getting a job.
It's just a completely different era. It's disgusting. We were both born in 85, right? Just put in perspective. So this would have been post that 1980, 81 thing that you mentioned. But always knowing sort of the stories of that, and then reliving kind of our own thing of support the troops and that stuff, which it's different. Like,
right.
It's very hard to it, because we can complain and say it's not. There's obviously people do it just to be noticed and market for it, sure, and they don't care. Yeah, that is true, but it's still completely different, because I never at one point thought that I would hide that on a resume. I was trying to lead with it. My main goal when I got out was to just really try to convince someone the soft skills that, yeah, it was infantry, but hey, it's a people dynamic game and personalities, and having uncomfortable conversations, being direct, but also respectful. That's how I would summarize it, which is, doesn't really matter what you're doing. That's how you figure out whatever it is, problem you're trying to solve. But I was always leading with Army, and deployment. Hey, combat experience. I was trying to showcase that. And people did want to, they don't relate to it, but they're trying to listen and understand too. And to think about like what you went through when you had this, because you feel like there's a social contract, you think, you know what I mean? Like, hey, we're going to go wear the uniform, go off and do a bad lane, and then come back, and we're supposed to learn from that or something. And be thankful that it happened, that you didn't have to, right? Somebody else did. Right. That's kind of the point of it. So I don't know what that would have felt like.
Well, I'm pretty active in my local Veterans of Foreign Wars. I'm the adjutant, I write the newsletter, and I'm on the honor guard. And a lot of the guys say, and they're all Vietnam veterans, they all say, when we hear thank you for your service, it sounds hollow. It's, they say it's probably the same guys who used to spit at it on us back in the 60s who are now saying thank you for your service now. So that's a lot of attitude there.
Sure.
Well, I think a big reason that it's changed, I've heard a lot of folks kind of say something very similar, that Sayre and I and our generation has had it so good in that sense, even if at times it may sound hollow, is because the pendulum swung so far for Leigh, you and your brothers. I think generally as a society, we learned from that, and people don't want to do that again, and can recognize that you weren't the one setting policy. You weren't the one setting ROE or deciding on operations. And it seems silly almost to pin that on the individual soldier, but it a lot of folks did. I guess that was the easiest thing to do. It was more relatable to say Leigh is Vietnam rather than some government that we have no contact with.
Right. And like I said, there were a lot of people who did not, when their number was called or when they got drafted, never showed up at the induction center. People went to Canada. And so there was a lot of divisive feelings back then. And it's just different now, which is good.
What about while you were in Vietnam? Did you know that this was it back in your mind what you'd be coming home to, or was it just too laser focused on the task at hand?
Well, the first week I was in the jungle, we got when they bring out resupply, they brought out a bunch of copies of Stars and Stripes, and there was the Kent State shootings right on the front cover on all of this. And a lot of the veteran soldiers there were incensed that the National Guard would shoot innocent civilians, especially American civilians. And what was sort of ironic is we had a member of our company whose brother was in the National Guard and actually went to trial over that.
Oh.
This is ironic. He's in Vietnam in the infantry, and his brother's in the National Guard in Ohio, and totally different, opposite sides within the military. So it was a strange situation.
What a strange, yeah. What a strange time with that. You know, and you mentioned like what they die for and sort of the point of it, but my take on that as someone who came after was like, I would be of the opinion it did matter because we all learned from it. And we can compare Afghanistan to Vietnam. There's a lot of parallels, but you know, you guys lost about 60,000 people. And we lost, I think, GWAT's around 10,000. And and we have more people in the country, and we were able to do that with all volunteers. We didn't force people that didn't want to be there. And I like that aspect, and I would think that we're learning. And I think that we had our, you got to take your certain hills that you got to take, and you don't want to take them. We have those too, but I don't think we had them to the degree that you guys did, where just repeatedly take the hill and then just leave it. And again, we did that. We lost tons of equipment. A lot of parallels, but I still think it was reduced. And I remember my uncle was a platoon leader, and he had his platoon, I guess, had a lot of casualties prior to him, and that was a worry. And he was one of those guys that didn't really talk about it. But the only lesson just as a kid, I always remembered was the story of, look, we just went the worst way possible. We just didn't go down any path. We just bust brush the entire way. And
that's right.
had very few sort of attacks and things like that. And so I would say that platoon before, those guys that died before my uncle got there, well, they paid, you know, we paid it forward. You know, they didn't die for nothing. Like those hard lessons learned continue to be applied as long as they're told, and we, you know, have that perspective. And in that regard, I would view it as a success also because it, we still didn't have nuclear war, which is always on the table back then. It always is now, but we were able to do that in a proxy war with almost a tenth of the KIAs that we had for the prior war that we were in World War II. Well, I'm not going to talk about Korea. That's its own animal too. But anyway, I do think we were just finished our longest war that the Americas had, but we did it with a lot fewer casualties. And I think that that's important. And I think Vietnam is in there because I think it is always in the back of people's minds as a hard lesson.
Right. Many people say that the incursion into Iraq and Afghanistan, that the people who set the policy made many of the same mistakes that Johnson and Nixon made back in the 60s. I don't know for sure. That's just what I hear.
Well, it definitely, you know, one of the things I don't think we learned was the one war fought 10 years or 20 years in the Afghan case. I mean, that's just not, it's not acceptable. It's not tied together. It doesn't pass any common sense muster. And we did it again. And so that's definitely frustrating, right? Because it's the worst. It's one thing to make a mistake and to fall on your face. It's an entirely different thing. You're supposed to just dust yourself off and just keep moving forward, right? Okay, I'm not going to trip back there again. Now I know there's a pothole, or I should tie my shoes. But then to make it again for the same thing, similar reasons, that is, it's very frustrating. And I felt that way with Vietnam guys. Like I've always felt sort of related to Vietnam guys in a way, doing the deployment thing, but now it's almost even more, it does feel even closer now with you guys in this coming home, more, well, the experience itself, and then just coming home and trying to understand our left and right limits as to what the heck we're doing here, just as a civilian trying to figure it all out.
Well, I have many guys I know in the Charlie company who feel like I do, that it was a matter of you had a responsibility, you had a term of service, this was the job you were given to do, and therefore you do it. We didn't question our officers. I never questioned Lieutenant Bob when he told me to do anything. We just did it. And yeah, I told you that story about that instance at Kansas State University when we talked Sayre last week. So,
Well, yeah.
yeah,
Tell us about that.
the guy asked, "Is anybody?" It was a class in the Vietnam War at Kansas State University, and the professor asked, "Has anybody in here walked point?" And a lot of people were veterans in there, and not thinking, I put my hand up. Sure, I have. And he said, "Well, tell us what it was like." And I became tongue-tied. I couldn't do it. I just said, "Well, you just do it. You just do it." And that's what it was. Sure, something could happen. You could step on a landmine, you could walk into an ambush, but hey, how could you stop it? You can't control it. So don't worry about it. You just do it.
When Leigh says walking point, he's talking about any patrol, somebody has to be in the front. Somebody. There's got to be a front to that formation. And point man, it's a term. You don't hear middleman or rear. I mean, rear guard, I guess, is a thing, but point man, there's like an aura around that. There's a lot of responsibility in that position.
Sayre, did Lieutenant Bob ever tell you about the first time I walked point for him? I walked it for 5 minutes and he fired me from the job.
He did.
Yeah.
Let me back this up. I want to hear that, but yeah, the point, here's what I understand about point man. And I really didn't notice it until Week of the Eagles, hanging out with a bunch of Vietnam guys from not just 506, but just kind of everybody. That is a specific term of art in Vietnam. Like we had point guys too, but like in Vietnam, they introduce one another. Like he was a point man, my point man, but like it would be like, say, like a tunnel rat. We know that has a certain term of art. Point man has a certain, because not everybody was the point man. And so it's an endearment and it's a respect sort of label to have upon a person. That's how I saw it, Leigh.
Well, you know, Lieutenant Bob's buddy, Ranger Bill, he pointed out to me, well, when you're the point man, you are the point of the spear. When you go through the jungle, you are the first person there. So I guess that must be the source of the admiration for the job. I never thought of it that way. I just was given the job to do, and I did it for 60 days for Charlie Company, and that was it.
How much time do you spend because you're learning the entire time what you're seeing, what you're hearing, what you're smelling as point man? How much time do you spend relaying that information to kind of train whoever comes next? You know, God forbid something happened to you, somebody else has to do it. But at 60 days, somebody else is doing it anyways. Are you teaching and training that whole time as well?
Well, what we had was, I don't know how they were selected arbitrarily or what, but the platoon sergeant just said, okay, you're walking point, and this fellow over here is going to be your slack man. So every point man had a slack man, and then we would trade off. The slack man would walk point and I would walk slack. And the purpose of the slack man was to save the life of the point man, because the point man, and I know from hearing Lieutenant Bob's story that the mountainous jungle was so thick that to get through the jungle, you had to cut your way through the jungle. I had my M16 or my M79 right here, but with the swinging of the machete all the time, every step of the way, you know, you needed somebody to have your back, and that was the slack man's job.
What were you guys doing hacking through brush like that? Because I know we already hinted at the idea that roads and trails are dangerous, but what were you generally hoping to accomplish hacking through jungle like that?
Well, to not make contact, even though Bob says that's what we did. If you walk the trail, there's booby traps and ambushes and everything. And if you cut the jungle, there are no booby traps or ambushes, unless the NVA, the North Vietnamese Army, would hurry up and figure out, well, which way are they going? And let's try and get in front of them and attack them. So, and that never happened, which is why I think I was selected to do point, because I had a good sense of direction. And Lieutenant Bob taught me the best way to get where you want to go is to go in a straight line. So, and if that means cutting through a big stand of bamboo, you cut through a big stand of bamboo.
Hmm. And are you guys walking in file?
Yeah, single file. And it would
And
be
when
the
you
point
were-
man, the slack man, and then other riflemen, and then would be the squad leader. And then behind him, there would be more infantry, and then the platoon leader and a lieutenant on platoon size operations would usually be in the middle with his radio operator. And so he could get to the front or the back as quickly as possible.
Is
Because
the
of-
idea,
were,
I was gonna say, is
Go
the
ahead, Steve.
idea, because, hopefully not walk into an ambush there, but when you're in that thick of vegetation, is the idea still that the enemy knew you were out there? They were aware
yeah.
that you were moving around. So it was kind of a disturbance operation, display, that was kind of the high level.
Right, well, right there around Ripcord, Fire Base Ripcord, there were 2 battalions of NVA in that area.
You were just keeping them on their toes.
Well, like I said, even though we had a job to do and we did what we were told to do, no one wanted to be the last man to die in Vietnam in 1970. Because it was really winding down. We were getting many troops from the 1st Infantry Division, the 25th Infantry Division, the division had been sent back to the United States, but the guys who still had time to do were sent to the 101st. And they couldn't wait to get out of there either. Everybody wanted out because, there's no front line in the jungle. You can't tell when you make any progress. You just keep going and do what you're told to do.
Because it sounds like you really weren't doing, like, what would you call your missions? It doesn't sound like they were movement to contact, but they also feel like they were a sort of presence patrol, kind of, to at least let the NVA know that you guys are in the area and you're active. Were you actually looking for a direct target to hit? And this was just on your way there and you're just kind of busting brush. What was that mission set?
Well, the enlisted personnel weren't told much. And I complained to Lieutenant Bob about this on many occasions, and he said he wasn't told very much either. Because you always see in the war movies, the commander gets the guys together and goes, okay, we're going to go down here, we're going to bust through here, we're going to take out this pillbox, we're going to do that, and all that. And not in Vietnam. It was just a saddle up, just saddle up.
And you're just going to a point on the map then?
Right.
And doing patrol bases at night?
Yeah, and one day I said when I first started in the field, I was an assistant machine gunner, and I said to my machine gunner, I said, I'm going to go up and see what Lieutenant Bob says. I'm going to see what the plan is. Why are we here? And so I went over to where Lieutenant Bob was, and he was talking to the platoon sergeant. And Lieutenant Bob was looking at the map, and he pointed at the map, and he goes, see that hill there on the map? That's that hill over there. And the platoon sergeant says, no, it's the hill over there. So I went back and I told the machine gunner, he says, well, what'd you find out? And I says, they don't know where we're at.
That sounds like a story that could be told throughout military history.
I know. I mean, I would have been the guy with the map, right? So, like, what was your feeling being like, what the hell? Because you're the private out there in the middle of the woods, essentially, or the jungle, and you got to follow orders and do as you're told. Like, what's that feeling like then?
You're not in control of your environment or your situation at all. So you just kind of go with the flow. You really do.
I don't think we have a good comparison for what the jungle was like. I'm here in Tennessee. We've got some pretty nasty undergrowth in the summer. But if you were to stop at some point where you're walking point and look to your left and right, how far could you actually see through that?
About 2 feet.
Oh, it's a wall.
Yeah, it's just a wall of jungle, which is why it was safer to hack through the jungle than to go up a trail.
That's slow moving. I mean, you're going really slow.
Right.
I would imagine.
Right.
Okay.
Right. To go 1,000 meters would take a day or a day and a half.
That's my question is, these were all, you were moving during the day, right?
Right.
And then you would patrol base, post up at night, and then wake
Right.
up and do it all again?
Right. The night defensive position is where we would all get in a circle on top of the hill and dig a foxhole and breastworks and put out our claymores and put out our hand grenades and clean our rifles and to prepare for the night, because many times the NVA attacked at night.
When Bob was on, we spent a lot of time talking about the shelling at Ripcord. The amount of mortars and recoilless rifles that were fired on the troops there at Ripcord. Was there anything, do you remember if the guys preferred going out on these patrols to get away from that, or was it preferred to be back on Ripcord and not be walking through the jungle?
Well, that time Bob was talking about, which was July of 1970, was different from the time when I was on Ripcord in the last week of April and the first week of May. All we did was build the fire base up at the direction of Captain Vasquez, the captain of Charlie Company. And he was, like Bob said, Ripcord was never overrun because the wire was hog wire. You know what hog wire is? It's these squares, and it stands about 6 foot tall, and they were attached to, and it was very strong wire, as strong as barbed wire. But it was just square wire, and they called it hog wire, and they were attached to the tall engineering stakes. And then on the other side was the jungle, and on the Ripcord side, Captain Vasquez had us build quite a bit of tanglefoot. Are you familiar with tanglefoot?
It's worth talking about, though. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah.
It's you take concertina wire and you step on it, and then you so that you try to get it as flat to the ground as possible, and then you crisscross it with short engineering stakes to keep the concertina wire down, and you crisscross it with barbed wire. So you're constantly working with that razor wire and the barbed wire, and your hands sure get cut up.
Too low to crawl under.
Yeah, right.
You have to try to walk across it, and you get your foot all tangled up in it. There we go.
Yeah, the NVA would have to go through the hog wire, through the tanglefoot, plus rows of concertina wire and all sorts of stuff. So that's why Ripcord didn't get overrun, because Captain Vasquez had a very good plan for building that fire base.
But it took a shellacking in terms of shelling, if I'm not mistaken.
Right.
Yeah.
That was the only way they could get at Ripcord. But in July, I was never on Ripcord during that time.
Were fire bases being over? I mean, was that then an MO of the NVA? Were they taking like engine sappers in and blowing stuff up in a breach and then trying to flood in with people? Right.
One friend of mine who served with Alpha Company, second of the 501st, before I arrived in April, they had been run over on Firebase Gladiator or Granite, and I can't remember, and I think it was Gladiator. After that, they were moved to Firebase Henderson, and if you ever read about Firebase Henderson, 20 new guys were killed in one night. They had just been flown in from Camp Eagle to Firebase Henderson, and they didn't have enough fighting positions or bunkers for these guys, so they were sleeping out in the open. And the NVA attacked at 4 a.m, and they had flamethrowers. And a friend of mine from AIT was KIA. He was one of the new guys. It was his first day in the field. He was KIA. And my other buddy from AIT, who was in a fighting position with 2 veteran guys, and all he did was reload M16s and pass hand grenades because they were fighting the NVA from the fighting position, and he was so new, he had never experienced that. It was his first day in the jungle as well. So overrunning the fire base was in the 101st area of activity was something that didn't happen with regularity, but it did happen quite a bit.
That's I don't know if it's because, I don't know if it's as we move further away from the war or why, but I feel like so many movies and shows and books focus on the unconventional fight, Viet Cong guerrillas, ambushing, small groups, ambushing and booby traps and that. But to hear North Vietnamese Army, regular conventional units with flamethrowers and sapper units, that's combat engineers to blow holes in wire. It's in a weird way sounds like a different war.
Yeah, but the other things did happen too. Well, we'd set up at a night defensive position, and if we stayed there, if we didn't get up and move right away and we hung around, that got dangerous because they would hit us and run. AK fire and RPGs, and then before we could even hardly fire back, they'd be on the move out of that area. But there was a lot of hit and run kind of action there.
Well, I imagine in that thick jungle, you just about couldn't see a muzzle flash, right? There's
Right. No, not a well, yes and no. Yeah.
maybe,
could.
I guess.
Yeah. Depends on how thick it was and where you were positioned. Yeah, Lieutenant Bob told you about the guy who lost his weapon during a firefight. That was me.
I don't think you told.
Tell that story.
Not on
Because
here.
that's a good story that maybe someone can learn from, that because you might carry certain thoughts for a long time, and it might all be silly at the end of the day.
Well, I had extensive therapy with the VA over that incident because I couldn't talk about it. And if I did talk about it, I'd get very emotional and start to cry. I was standing on the edge of a night defensive perimeter, and about 100 yards away, no, maybe 50 yards, we had some guys that were building a landing zone so that a helicopter could come in and deliver supplies and pick up the battalion commander who was with us on this particular day. Well, when you build a landing zone, you use a lot of C4 and dynamite and det cord and machetes and whatever to cut the brush down so the helicopter can come in. Well, they were doing that, and I was standing at the edge of the NDP having a cigarette talking with some other guys, and about 4 feet from me, I had my M16 leaned up against the tree. And all of a sudden, the AK fire and RPG fire started. So to get a view of this, the NDP was here, then where they were building the LZ was here, and on the other side of the LZ was the NBA firing at the LZ workers. But their bullets and RPGs were coming into the NDP.
Night defensive position, is that what that stands for? Okay.
So as soon as the AK fire started, I dived for my rifle. Well, 2 other guys did too. And the last time I saw my M16, my hand was in the middle, and there was a hand coming in from the left and a hand coming in from the right. And the guy on the right got my 16 and boogied. And I was left there under AK fire with no weapon. And I started to low crawl towards the CP and get as low as I could to the ground because, the bullets were going zip, 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 snap, snap, all kinds of stuff like this. And I eventually made it to the CP only by yelling Kurahi, which was the battalion motto. They always said, if you ever get lost in the jungle and you want to get saved by the American forces, yell Kurahi, because the Vietnamese would never yell Kurahi. And so the guy who was on my left and I, we both low crawled to the CP. And to make a longer story short, when I went back to the line of the NDP after the firefight was over and the medevacs were coming in, picking up the wounded, my M16 was gone and nobody knew where it was. And of course, and if you look at it from the view of the platoon leader and a platoon sergeant, it was if I had thrown my M16 away and ran toward the CP. That's the way it appeared.
Yeah.
Because they said, well, where's your rifle? I don't know. Where is it? But when, and so with that initial feeling with the AK bullets flying overhead and no weapon to protect yourself, because my immediate thought was grabbing that 16 and getting behind that tree and laying down fire, return fire.
Sure.
But I didn't get it. And so the wave of adrenaline that hits your brain is just paralyzing. And so the first moments when the firing started and I was lying on the ground, I was just paralyzed for like 5 to 10 seconds. The adrenaline was just massive. But I did finally get my wits together and low crawled to the CP. And I was in a daze from that afterwards. I mean, I was in such a daze from that situation that I couldn't even put words together to ask my fellow soldiers, my brothers, where was my M16? And it just, and so there I was out in the jungle with no rifle. All I had was hand grenades and the Claymore mine. And we humped for 3 days and I had no rifle in the jungle. And no
Really?
one could explain why my rifle had disappeared until I was at Week of Eagles about 4 years or 5 years ago. One of the guys who was building the LZ said, well, there was a bunch of leftover rifles when we evacuated the wounded, that we just threw all these rifles on the medevac. And one of those rifles was my rifle. And how it got there, I have no idea.
Wow.
And that's one of those things, you know, this is me just thinking about it as an observer or whatever. You did nothing, you did all the right things. And you're talking about freezing and all this, but like, think about it. You drop, you took, these are all the battle drills that are ingrained. It's like, you get shot at, you drop, you take cover, you grab a weapon, you return fire. Okay, no weapon, you got to move. You can't stay pinned down. Where do you move? To a place that has weapons to get a weapon to return fire. And you low crawl all the way, you know.
Or at the CP maybe they need stretcher bearers, right? Maybe they need a radio man. The CP is the place to go. That's the right move. You're right, Sayre.
Well, I was ordered by the CP to return to my position on the defensive perimeter line. And when I got down there, my M16 could not be found. Could not be found.
So we're talking 40 years later. Case closed.
Yeah, well, I worked through this with a psychologist at the VA. He had me write it out, and we talked about it, and tears were shed and all sorts of things. And that helped quite a bit. The VA has helped me quite a bit with my PTSD. So I can talk about it now, where if we were having this conversation 10 years ago, I wouldn't have been able to say a thing.
Was that early on in your time in Vietnam?
No,
Middle of
it was in the middle.
So you've been in the fight before that point. I was having a conversation with one of my soldiers last year, which would have been at the 10-year mark. And he was a PFC frontline guy, driver in IED country or point man, you know, he was always up there. And he was telling there was a story where we had to break contact one time. We kind of got rolled up in an open field and it wasn't pleasant, but everybody made it back. Nobody, you know, nobody got hurt. We were able to break contact. And he was carrying around this feeling of like, because as soon as we took rounds, as a machine gun, as RPK, one of the team leaders just dropped like just dead weight. And I thought he was hit like dead actually. And so, you know, that was what it looked like. And, but that's not what happened. That's not what happened. You know, he dropped, he took cover, returned fire. And the private that I'm mentioning, the soldier, carries guilt for like, I guess getting rolled up in the field or not, like the fact that his team leader dropped like that, like he was dead, even though he wasn't dead. My soldier felt a lot of guilt from just like letting him down or something, you know. And
it wasn't actually there. Yeah,
well, it just wasn't reality is what I'm saying. It's like but he played the bad scenario in his head so much, I think, that he feels like he let somebody down. And in breaking contact, I think, is a letdown, because we sort of had to haul ass back, and because we almost got caught, it almost turned into a bad day, and just that fact alone. And anyway, it was like, I just remember talking to him, because it was like, well, what did you do? And to me, it was exactly what you're talking about. Well, you know, you drop down, you take cover, you return fire, okay, bound backwards. Not everybody just picked up and hauled ass. And it was like, that was textbook break contact, what you're describing right now. The fact that we had to do break contact, whatever, doesn't matter. What was the response? And it is fascinating to think of well, it's like we're our own worst enemies. You know, that's not, he never got yelled at for anything like that. That was not a thing back then, that, oh, I can't believe you did that. It was not at all like that. It was just in his own mind of just beating himself up, you know.
Right. When that happened to me, neither the platoon leader or platoon sergeant chewed me out or anything about it. They just never said anything about it. But I felt the shame of that for years and years and years, and the guilt. Yeah. And it was just awful. But I did talk to a VA psychologist that I talked to about it, and he said, "Oh, that's a common wartime experience." And I said, "What?" He said, "Yeah, I just treated a Korean War veteran who was up on a hill on the Chosin Reservoir, and the Chinese attacked, and he ran to a foxhole, and he didn't have his weapon with him, and he jumped in the foxhole, and there are no weapons around the foxhole, and the Chinese are coming up the hill." So same situation, you know, he's being shot at, no weapon. It can happen, but to me, I felt like it only happened to me. It never happened to anybody else in Vietnam. It just happened to me.
And there's no good way to defend yourself, if that makes sense, to your peers at that point. Like, no, this is what actually happened, because the perception is so strong in the heat of the moment.
Well, that's why 4 or 5 years ago at the Week of Eagles at Fort Campbell, I was able to talk about it after I'd been counseled through this and all the feelings with that. And I came to find out where my M16 ended up.
You know, it's crazy. I mean, so there's an advertisement for Week of the Eagles or any reunions. It's funny how you can have somebody, whoever it might be, a trained professional, explaining how, Leigh, it's not your fault. It's a normal thing. But sounds like it didn't really connect until it was actually somebody there said, "I've got your answer," or whatever it might be. It's those random little interactions.
Right. It was out of my control. Someone else got my M16 before I could get to it. And it was like a split second, like that. It was that fast.
You wonder how many other people never thought about that again, right? Never thought about it.
I don't know. All I know is how I felt.
Sure.
Terrible.
That's the problem. That's the tricky part, because it's all relative. But it is how we take it in, because I'm sure you could easily said in your mind, like, what am I to complain about? You know, there's other people that saw, you know, their buddies cut, and think of the ripcord, you know, where guys getting ripped in half or something that you see right in front of your eyes. And you feel like, well, that was nothing, no problem for me. But you say those things, but it's kind of it's a lie. It's a lie. You're trying to trick yourself, you know, and just hide it. And then, those feelings are always there under the surface. That's how I feel, you know. Because at first I don't even think you feel them at all when you come home. It's just like it almost takes time for these things to kind of rise,
right,
a little bit. Everyone's different, but it's 100% to somebody, because there are people that haven't been shot at all, or they haven't had the bullet zipping, and they were just on a FOB or a fire base one time that got shelled off in a distance. And it didn't even, you or any of us here would have thought, well, that's nothing, right? That happened all the time. But for them, it was 100% of something for them. That was 100% of their trauma, let's say. And that's all that matters, really, is how they perceive it, not any of us. It's all individual. And none of us are tougher than the other. You know, you don't have to out-tough any of that stuff.
Right. It just seems that as life goes on, if you don't get help with the PTSD, it gets worse. And I had a therapist say that. It's like any other disease. If you have a disease and you get no medical help for it, the disease gets worse. And PTSD is sort of like that as well, because the VA never really started addressing PTSD in Vietnam veterans till the late 90s and early 2000s. And I had a friend who was killed in Vietnam but didn't die till 2002 because of PTSD. He took his own life. So,
Leigh, if it's not too personal, when did you first start talking about that, about PTSD and seeking treatment after you came home?
Well, you know, after a while, when you keep losing job after job, and the anger issues and the impulsiveness and all of that, you know something's wrong, because you're not the same person who returned from Vietnam as the person who went to Vietnam. And it's very noticeable. And I started seeking help in the late 80s because I was going to change careers to be a high school English teacher. And I had this problem where I couldn't speak before a class of peers without having a panic attack. And I sought help because how could I be a teacher in front of a class and suffer panic attacks? And I worked my way through that and finally was able to do that. But yeah, it's PTSD is a hard road. It really is. I'm 100% disabled with the VA, and I see a psychologist once a week, and I see a psychiatrist once every 3 months. So it's quite the deal.
And Sayre hit on it where I think everybody's guilty in some way of, I never had it as bad as the other guy. And the other guy looks like he's doing fine. So who am I? But you never know. You never know what demons somebody's working through. So that's
exactly right. Like my friend, he had it so bad, he took his own life. And, you know.
I'm glad that the VA is helping you. I mean, I've seen them for services too. I'm in Cincinnati. They have a GWAT trailer for us younger guys. And, you know, they say they didn't have the mental health until the 90s, but that's another thing, right? You guys are paving that forward with veterans' rights, and our burn pit is your Agent Orange. All the suffering and work you guys have done has not been futile. I mean, it is truly, we are still, can it be better? Oh yeah. Is there more to do? For sure. But the kindling and the fire has been started. And a lot of that is from you guys.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I think a lot of the services, if you mention Agent Orange at the VA, they act like they didn't hear you. Because there's so many different issues involved with it. It's just I saw in on the news or something I read. I subscribed to 4 newspapers, and one of them had this thing where on the burn pit registration, if the VA were to pay out all the claims for those affected by burn pits, the total would be $282 billion just to pay out burn claims. So I think that's what the government was looking at with the Agent Orange, is that if we pay out all these claims for people who have ailments from Agent Orange, why it would just, I guess, bankrupt the government. That's the only thing I can think of. Why they act so strange.
Takes you down another rabbit hole conversation there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Did you, before we started recording, you were talking about the Ripcord Association, and I think there's a 506th Association. We've talked about Week of the Eagles. How long after you came home did you start getting involved in any of these kind of veteran, I was going to say veteran organization, but groups of your peers?
Not
Reunion
until,
type stuff.
not till the early 2000s when the internet became ubiquitous. And you could get online and all these different web pages, and you type in Ripcord and holy, whoa, where did that come about? You know, and then 506, oh, they got that. And then Charlie Company that Bob Liebecky and I were in has its own organization.
Oh, cool.
And they're going to Gettysburg this year for their reunion.
Wow.
That is cool.
I like that they're more specific than, VFW, AMVETS, American Legion. They all do great things. But there's something more about somebody who is in even the same division. But when you start getting down into battalions, regiments, companies.
I know. Well, seeing guys that I remember seeing this one guy I hadn't seen in 45 years, but it was just like, hey, we were still in the jungle, we're still brother to brother, and that was still it.
I wonder if we would apply as a government, if we would apply funding towards reunions for veterans. You invest in that, and I think you're going to get payoff of some of the mental health stuff that may come later on down the road, because I think it's important. We don't, we're past the days of the parade, where you go down Main Street and everybody knows you served and did your time. It's become more obscure and irrelevant, but that's not true at the units though. And I would almost wish to see that it was almost programmed in, just like the VA is and those sort of things, to have these sort of planned reunions for people of the regiment, because I just think there's no greater thing than a young guy in the unit hanging out with the old timers, but then the old timers hanging out with the young timers, and then everybody in between.
Right.
It's just a healthy, because it is a familial relationship with units. I feel like, having gone through it myself and getting to know one another, because I believe like Easy Company 2506 for the Band of Brothers, I think they had their first reunion at like 1946.
Oh, really?
As soon as they got back. You guys were doing that 365-day thing. You weren't even training up as full units, just coming over as individuals, coming back as individuals. That's horrible. I mean, it really is. And then to a society that doesn't even want you. You can't mention it. You can't act like it. You got to forget about it. You got to just move on. That's traumatic alone from a moral injury standpoint, on that collective, that societal contract we're all supposed to be agreeing to, as we are left and right limits of a product of a civilized society. And then for us, we at least have, us newer guys have we have Facebook. So at least we're not, you guys are just completely on, your home of record was probably your parents' address, and you go off and go to college and do all sorts of other stuff. There's no way of getting a hold of you. You just can't look someone up the way you can now. But we still aren't doing the formal reunion type stuff. And I just wish there was a way to accomplish that in almost like a government planning for this. Hey, with your veterans, a part of it is, we acknowledge it's a new era. You're not going to have the parades, but we're going to make it easy on veterans to get to almost on orders or something, to be able to, like, where it's free pay, free travel or something, where it's, if we get free national park tickets, great.
Right.
But going back to your division, and someone who was stationed in Hawaii, getting to go back on post to Hawaii again, where they were a 20-some-year-old, like literally wherever they came up in their youth, of all generations, I think. I mean, this is obviously, it all costs money, and there's many problems in the world, but I think that it would do a lot of good in the veteran population. That's all I know.
Right. I agree with you. I got most of my help at the VA after going to my first reunion and talking to guys who had been through that VA system and the help that they had received there. Then it was okay for me to do it because other guys in my company had done it, my platoon and things like that. And that wouldn't have happened if I had not gone to the reunion. So yeah, I think going to reunions is very therapeutic.
Yeah. And then we're all going through, life is hard too. You have kids and you got a job and a shitty boss.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's good to relate to people like that on a one-on, someone who's like dealing the same issues with the anger and the short fuse, and it's ridiculous. And it's ridiculous. And the panic attacks over silly things that are silly.
Right.
I've been there with all of that, similar circumstance. But if you don't tell anybody, you're just suffering in silence when it's the worst part I feel like about military. Well, we know the value of the teamwork. We've seen it firsthand. Everybody doing their job, working together, can accomplish amazing things. We know that it's the team of all teams. And then to just go back and be an individual and not know that we can still work together in a way to collaborate. And it takes the suffering off the individual, I think, in a better way than just siloing oneself.
Right. It gives you an outlet for all that frustration. Exactly right.
Well, Leigh, we spent some time talking about grouping all Vietnam veterans in the same bucket when you came home and kind of the negative side of that. But I'd like to take as we kind of wrap up here from the other side, to thank all of you for the stuff we're talking about here, the the progress with the VA, the Agent Orange, how that was all, it's not good, but how it's been handled and the doors you guys have opened for our generation. It's not a secret. I think a lot of people recognize it and appreciate it. And, above and beyond just your service, which is no joke, especially what you're doing in Vietnam, the legacy even today, helping organize reunions, working with the VFW, talking like this. Honestly, there's going to be somebody, maybe one of your peers in Vietnam, maybe somebody from the Gulf War, maybe one of our peers from the Global War on Terror that hears your experience, Leigh, and goes and gets some help.
That'd
And
be great. That
that's
would be
awesome.
great.
That's such it's an awesome legacy that you're continuing on. So thank you.
It's been a lot to endure, though. It hasn't been easy at all. But of course, you guys know that.
Well, and don't we say, I know what we say with the Vietnam guys, we say, welcome home.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's a
welcome
lot
home.
better than thank you for your service.
Yeah.
You know.
So welcome home.
Well, thank you. Welcome home to you too.
Leigh, thank you so much for taking the time. I look forward to hopefully crossing paths at Week of the Eagles or the 101st reunion or wherever it might be. But it's been great talking with you. Thank you so much.
All right. Good to see you guys again.
Yeah.
You as well. Take care, sir.
All right. You too. Bye.